On the nose is not bad, you just got to know when to use it.
Glenn, when you say dialogue is action, what does that mean?
People don't talk to each other without some intention. In other words, if you speak, like obviously in a certain sense, like you can go to the counter at a deli and say, can you give me that thing on the shelf? You're speaking because you want something. But you could also be sitting around a living room with a bunch of other people and you say something that you hope is funny because you want to make everyone like you, or you want to impress a certain people, or you want to put somebody down. Whatever it is, those are very different intentions. And those are things you want to do. I want to impress, I want to insult. Whatever it is, you are trying to do something when you speak, always. And the range of things that you could be doing in dialogue is very large, but it's always doing something. Sometimes it's just stalling, but then stalling is an action. You know, that's the important thing to remember. Refusing to give information is an action. So therefore, you could be evading. You could be saying, you know, somebody says like, where's the secret formula? And you say, I remember when I was a kid, and you're just, you know, you're stalling. You're avoiding telling. That is an action. Anytime you have people speak, they are trying to do something to the other people in that scene. That is the operating thing that makes dialogue feel alive. The problem is almost always people are, for some reason, convinced that dialogue is information. In other words, that they're telling someone because the audience needs to know, oh, you know, I'm going to the train station to pick up my uncle because he lost his business. Okay, unless the other person in that scene needs to know about the lost business, that line's going to be weird. Like, if there's two people who have both been living together for a year and their uncle is coming and they clearly have heard, you know, they know about the uncle, and then somebody says, I got to go to the train station because my uncle lost his business, the other person in the room say, I know. So the point is you have to think, okay, how would it be? Like, can I find someone who doesn't know? Or can you say, the other person will say, are you sure your uncle's on the train? You know, he may have not gotten on because of his business. And he's like, yeah, well, you know, he lost it. He needs to come. Somehow or other, you get the information into the moment that those two people are living, because they are living that moment. They are in that room deciding to go to the train station. And if for some reason you can't get your information into that, either change the scene and have it be that they're getting into a taxi and they're saying, you know, I got to get to the taxi, and the taxi driver says, oh, you're taking a trip? He says, no, I'm going to see my uncle. And you spill it out because you're just venting it. But the action there is you are venting anxiety to a person who will leave your life and there's no consequences. So the action is venting. But you couldn't do that to the person in your house because there's consequences to venting those feelings. So you have to think, where can this information dramatically make sense? Where does the person have a need and a reasonable expectation of that thing happening make sense to that scene? It's not about the information. You do have information you're trying to get across, but always ask, why does this person need to say that to the other person in this place at this moment? That's what dialogue is, action. And very often, a good scene can be two people talking, and there's a lot of action even though they're just sitting there talking. The most famous example is the opening scene of The Social Network. That's 9 minutes of two people sitting at a cafe table. A lot is happening. He's trying to impress her and win her over. She is basically realizing she's going to break up with him. This is not a spoiler, it's the first scene. But the point is, it's 9 minutes of dialogue right there. And it's action. A lot happens in that scene. There's a lot of back and forth of he feels undermined. He feels like he's, you know, and she feels like she's being ignored. And so they are saying things to essentially test, can you see me? Can you see that I have this feeling and I need you to recognize it? And they don't. And that causes the scene to go the way it goes. The point is, it's action. Something is happening between these two people. It's very important to them at that moment. It's just talk. 12 Angry Men. It's just talk for 2 hours, but it's great.
Right, Glengarry Glen Ross.
Gary and Ross, absolutely.
Yeah, I was looking something up about class, and I'll try to speed it up here, but just the way certain classes, maybe lower classes, which I was exposed to a lot of growing up, maybe is more direct and could be maybe at times seen as rude. And then I also was exposed to maybe more of a middle class where things are said in sort of a circuitous manner, where it's, hey, could you maybe, you don't want to offend anybody, but you don't really say what you mean. So just kind of the meshing of these two worlds and revealing someone's class by how they say something,
Well, that's actually a really important layer to this, which is while dialogue is action and that someone is trying to do something, we very rarely just say what we want. We just in life, because we are afraid we won't get it, or we feel like we have to maneuver the other person, or we feel like there's a certain set of social rules that you do not do or do not do certain things. So the thing about dialogue being action is while it is action, it may not be on the surface. It may be subtext in the sense that what the person wants, like somebody would say, oh, did you get the milk? And what they're really saying is, were you out gambling?
Right. I read that. Yeah. Totally got that. Yeah.
So and you would only know that because of other things around it, but they know it and they'll play it that way. And when you put that with the other scene where you see him gambling, and then the other scene where you see her, calling him up and saying, why isn't he at the office? And then when he comes home and she says, did you get the milk? We know that what she really means is, were you out gambling again? So the action is there, and it's very important to understand the action. Dialogue as action does not mean everything is on the nose. On the nose means you are saying exactly what you think. And the truth is we very rarely do it, which is why people say on the nose is bad, but actually on the nose is good when it comes at the right moment. Like at a certain point, you want to go on the nose. You want to say, this game playing of saying about the milk when you really mean, and at a certain point when they burst out and they say, I can't handle you gambling anymore. That's like the climax of the scene, like whatever was happening, the action was a game before then. Can I deny it? Can I avoid it? And no, how can I get him to say this without causing a fight? And then eventually it blows up into that explosion, and then the scene turns. The scene turns because someone was on the nose. On the nose is not bad. You just got to know when to use it.
Okay, I love it. I love it. Right, and that's great. And having worked in offices, they'll, how was your weekend, Glenn? Yeah.
Yes,
what does she mean by that?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We are all constantly reading each other. That's the important thing, is that to recognize that, and this is a failure of much modern cinema, because it's so compressed. There's so little time in a screen story. So therefore, people tend to just jam in the important stuff right on the surface. But the truth is, we spend our whole lives trying to read everyone around us, even the people we know and love. We're constantly reading them. So a good movie or screen story is going to let us read the characters. They're not going to tell us everything. We're going to read them, and then we get involved because we say, oh, he said that, but he means that. I wonder how the other person will react. Oh, I know that this tension is boiling underneath it because they're not saying it. Well, if you simply said it out loud, if you put everything up front so that the audience knows everything, then they have nothing to do. And audiences don't actually like to sit back and be told everything. Audiences like to put it together for themselves. You give them the pieces. Your job is figuring out what pieces do they want. It's like building a puzzle. And to say, okay, if you give them this piece and they give them this piece, they're going to be wondering how they go together or what's going to break when they go together. And so what our job really is to create something that the audience can read, can interpret, can work on. If you give them everything, they get bored, and then they just want more explosions.
No, it was great. I put it in ChatGPT, and I was curious what would two women in an office, one being more middle class and one being lower, how could they maybe misread each other by what they were saying, and it wasn't either one wasn't trying to offend, but the way somebody said it, maybe they were off-putting and they didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And it was great.
And actually, the question with that, the interesting thing, if you have two characters and you're trying to create a tension with the unspoken, the most important thing is that you, as the writer, needs to know the thing they are driven by, the thing that they are hiding, and then you decide not to put it. You say, what would they say to try and get what they want without saying what they want? And so you think, and that's when you create a character, because there's a lot of different ways. Somebody could be very jokey, or somebody could be sort of telling about themselves and just talking about themselves, and it's sort of weird that they are, because their stories about themselves are actually trying to provoke someone. So the way you create and define a character is by knowing the thing underneath, but then adding this made up layer, and there's not a right or wrong. That's where the stuff that's yours, like, oh, I think it would be funny if they just talked about flowers all the time. And so you just say, okay, well, how would the flower thing get into a romance discussion with the other person? And so there's like this layer of writing, knowing like the core action, and then that extra layer of decoration over it, which is personal. We all just say, oh, that would be, I like this character to be this way. And there's no right or wrong about that.
Right, but I love what you said about something about on the nose is where the tension sort of happens.
Yeah.
You know, so
yeah,
sort of like...
You want on the nose, you want it to either get things going or get things to stop, that something is going to happen. On the nose is a turning point, a revelation, like you finally explain or blurt out the truth. That's something that gets built up to, or that's something that comes out and then creates ripples of consequences. So you want on the nose, but you want it at the key moments. The moment that the audience will go, whoa, what's going to happen now? Or, oh, now I understand. That on the nose is a very, very valuable tool.
What's the relationship between show, don't tell, and dialogue?
A lot of people think that show, don't tell means put things into physical action. In other words, show being something you can look at without words. But that's not actually what show, don't tell means. What show, don't tell means is don't explain something. You can have people use words in order to, as I've said earlier, if someone is talking, they're trying to get something from the other person or make something happen. So there's an action there. And if that action is showing us how they feel or what they want, that's showing. Talking can be showing. The idea that talking is somehow not active is kind of a throwback. There was a period in Hollywood history, after silent films, when they first developed sound film, it was very difficult to record sound. They had to pad the whole place, and you really couldn't move that far from the microphone. Singing in the Rain explains it very well, and Babylon also explains it very well. The point is, for a long time, movies became stage-bound. They became talky because they couldn't record sound if they didn't stand still and talk. So they got a lot of people who were, in bad versions, explaining everything. In good versions, it's like a great play, and a great play, there's a lot of action happening in the dialogue. But what happened is, for about 30 or 40 years of Hollywood history, movies were very stuck. They were very talky. And so in the 50s and 60s, when technology allowed for sound recording to go crazy, and you could shoot on site, and you could do all this stuff, and films from other places outside Hollywood were showing other ways to do things, what happened was people discovered there are other ways for cinema to tell things other than basically filming a play. And in that moment, the idea that dialogue is bad was born. And that's a sad, tragic mistake. Dialogue is part of cinema. Talk is part of life. And therefore, you don't want to get rid of all the dialogue. You want to make the dialogue come alive in action, in showing. In other words, when someone talks, they are trying to do something which we are reading, we are interpreting, we are understanding what they are saying. They are not explaining to us, they are trying to act upon the other person in the room. We, the audience, don't exist. We got to figure out what they're up to. That's good dialogue, that's action, that's dialogue, and it's showing. The idea that all showing is simply visual makes for either very shallow movies or really cool movies, but often missing a certain part of our real lives. We talk a lot in real life. I'm talking a lot now, but think about your life. Think about how much of what you do in your life is talking. When you want something from someone, you tell them or you try to get them to do it. You do it with words, with dialogue. If you look at the amount of dialogue in your life, if you start to if you start to analyze the action of the dialogue in your everyday life, it's kind of mind-blowing how dramatic and how much action there is in talking. So my answer is, show, don't tell means make things happen. In other words, don't explain it, make it happen. Make someone take an action. That action can be talking or that action can be jumping off the roof. It doesn't matter. It matters that they are trying to do something in their reality, not explain to an audience, which in theory they don't even know exists. Show, don't tell should mean someone is trying to do something in the story, but we do a lot through talking.
So when you said in the last clip, the line of, I'm going to pick up my uncle, he just lost his business. Instead, it would be something like, I'm going to pick up Uncle Joe, whatever, and yeah, we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, that you would talk to the person in the room about Uncle Joe, and you would say, like, the question would be, okay, he's coming in from the train station, but he's only staying a week, right? I don't know. He's got no business left. He has nowhere to live. He could be here for 3 months. The action is these two people negotiating how long they can put up with Uncle Joe, and one feels more obligated than the other. We got the information about the business in the midst of that moment between them.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.